introduce to you Shane German. Shane will tell you his story, so I won't give much more of an introduction than that. But he works in Washington, D.C. at Sound Exchange, an organization that is a performing rights organization, pays a different performing right than BMI and ASCAP. When you register for BMI and ASCAP, you should also make sure to register for Sound Exchange to make sure you are paid on all the fronts on which you can be paid. Shane?
Yes.
Come on up.
All right. Thank you.
Please.
I like that there's a lot of musicians here. This is going to be a good conversation, I think.
Yeah, this is a music industry studies program, so a lot of musicians.
So, but currently working and out there gigging and
that's
playing.
Right. Oh, I know what I was going to say is that Sound Exchange employs paid interns. So and they employ them year-round, but summers especially. So if you have a desire to do an internship and you don't want to be broke, see Shane afterwards. He'll give you a card.
I will.
Okay. So to make things easier for Shane, I agreed to interview him. So Shane.
Yes, Billy.
Tell me, who are you?
I am Shane German, and I manage artist and label relations for Sound Exchange. We're a nonprofit organization that was set up by the U.S. Copyright Office in 1998 to administer performance royalties for featured artists and sound recording copyright owners when their music is played on satellite radio, cable radio, and internet webcasting services.
But not broadcast radio.
Not broadcast radio, and we'll get into that issue later. But there is a great injustice going on right now in the recording industry, and that FM, AM radio stations are not required to pay a royalty to the artists that are played on FM radio.
Right. How did you get, I mean, we'll cover that in a minute, but how did you get here at this point in your career? I mean, these are all budding music industry professionals. Mm-hmm. You were a filthy, dirty rock kid.
I was.
Who worked in filthy, dirty rock places and clubs. Right?
Yes. All in my 20s. I'm still a musician. I still play. I still record. I tour less frequently now than I used to. But in my 20s, that's all I wanted to do. I had that grandiose vision of I want to be a rock star. I want to make it. Whatever make it is. So I slept on floors, played dirty rock clubs, made no money, rented U-Haul vans at $19.99 a day, and put a couch in a cargo van so that we could have somewhere to sit instead of sitting on the floor. Totally unsafe, no seatbelts.
Not recommended.
Not recommended.
Even if you screw the legs down to the bottom of the U-Haul van, it's not recommended. You shouldn't do that.
But I seem to live my life in chapters. So from all through my 20s, I was doing the rock and roll thing. I worked in record stores. I was a buyer at Tower Records. I was a buyer.
Record stores are a thing that used to sell records, just so you know.
I worked at Tower Records as a music buyer, and then I went over to the corporate side and worked as a music buyer for Circuit City Corporation in Richmond, Virginia, and bought product on a national level. So I was filling CDs in all of their stores across the country. And then I just started noticing record stores were dwindling, and people weren't buying product as much as they were downloading or getting their music for free online. And then I realized that I really needed a 401k, and I really needed some health insurance. And I wasn't going to do that playing rock and roll clubs. So I found out about Sound Exchange, which was a relatively new organization at that time. And I applied there. And I basically started off cleaning toilets. I opened mail. I would do whatever it took just to get my foot in the door. And
it's interesting that you said, and you said this earlier today in one of the classes, that you saw the audience for music moving. We know that the audience for music didn't disappear. It moved. It went somewhere new. So when you saw Tower Records and Circuit City's not selling records anymore, you did detect, and accurately so, that the audience was moving somewhere else. And that's important for you guys to know, that the audience for music, obviously, is still there, and the commercial audience for music is still there. They moved, and they have different habits than they had before. And that's something that Sound Exchange can help you take advantage of and monetize.
So as a musician, I had to sit there and determine, do I want to spend what little money we do have as a band on pressing vinyl, or do I want to spend that money on an online marketing campaign and getting digital distribution and changing the business model of how I marketed my music or my art. So with Sound Exchange being such a new organization, I figured if I could get in on the ground level, I could grow my career with the organization. So as I'm working there and looking at the list of all of the people that they owed royalties to, because Sound Exchange was set up by the U.S. Copyright Office, you elect to be a member of ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC. That's your choice. And you pay a membership, and you can be represented by one of those organizations. The royalties that Sound Exchange collects, you have no choice. It's yours. And we were designated by the Copyright Office to basically allocate all of that money to people, whether or not they wanted it, whether or not they knew it was there. And there's no cost to join Sound Exchange. It's a right that you have.
And Sound Exchange is only 8 years old right now,
Yeah.
right? So this money's been accruing for a while, and it's from what time in history did we begin to collect the...
It dates back to 1996.
So it went all the way back to 96 and started collecting a performance royalty, that is to say, the royalty for the artist's performance of the song. So, for instance, can you give us examples of that? So, for instance, the song Respect.
So Respect by Aretha Franklin, when you hear it on an FM radio station and you're driving in your car and you hear Respect, Aretha Franklin does not get paid for that. Otis Redding gets paid for that because he wrote the song.
Which is fair enough.
Which is fair.
Yeah,
and Otis Redding is an amazing artist in his own right. But on satellite radio, when you hear Respect, Aretha Franklin does get a royalty because the rules are different. When music started going, or when the music industry started moving, the U.S. Copyright Office determined at that time that the current laws were unfair as it was on regular broadcast radio. So they took that opportunity to make royalties from subscription services like XM, Sirius, Music Choice, Yahoo Music, AOL Music. They took that opportunity to make those services start paying the artist and not just the songwriter.
So they took the new medium first.
Right.
And instituted a royalty for the artists performing the songs.
Right.
And and as well, a royalty is paid to the
sound recording copyright owner.
The
so whoever
copyright
owns the master.
Yeah, so the sound recording itself, the recorded song that is played, also generates a royalty, which goes to whoever the record company is.
So if you can imagine, XM radio has 103 channels or whatever it is, and they cross all genres: spoken word, comedy, musical theater, jazz, blues, Latin, salsa, house, hip-hop, Chicago house. I mean, they have so many different genres, and they play 24 hours a day. That's a lot of music to track. And satellite radio really can't administer those royalties, so that's where Sound Exchange steps in and does it for them. Now I'm looking, when I'm coming to work every day, I'm noticing that a lot of the people on the unregistered list, that is a list of people who still have money sitting in our accounts that need to be paid out, I'm looking and I'm like, I've toured with that band, I know that person, I've played with this band, I've played with this band. So within that realm, I basically just started getting all of my friends signed up. And they started getting checks within the music industry. And then that's when Sound Exchange said, you know what, you're probably a better artist label representative than you are a mail opener. So I was lucky in that there were only 13 employees at that time, so I sort of created my position there. And I've been at the company for 5 years. But I do have a daunting task because we currently pay over 5,000 copyright owners. And
sound recordings. Like generally speaking, about 5,000 labels.
Labels.
Right.
But as we move on and labels disintegrate, artists become their own label.
How many artists do you guys pay currently?
We pay 41,000 artists.
A lot of,
We've distributed over $232 million in royalties.
Wow.
And this past quarter, we pay on a quarterly basis. We distributed, our largest distribution was $58 million.
Wow.
So it's a lot of money that's out there. But I have a daunting task because there's an additional 40,000 artists that haven't registered, which means that there are 40,000 artists out there that have uncollected money. And we're a little unique in that when I call someone up, I'm not asking them to give me money, I'm trying to give them money. So I get a lot of hang-ups and, is this a scam? Because people think that it is, and it really isn't.
It's not every day in the music business that somebody calls you with $50,000.
Right, and it's mind-boggling sometimes to really have to reiterate, no, really, this is your money. Where do I send your check? And some people just still don't believe that it's real.
So, just so that we've covered this explicitly, what is the difference between Sound Exchange and ASCAP or BMI?
ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. You got to start saying CSAC.
Well, CSAC is invitation only, and
right.
so
right.
generally speaking, it doesn't apply.
Right.
But as you all know, CSAC exists alongside
right.
ASCAP and BMI.
Well, I'm just so used to spouting off those
yes,
three that I have to include them in it. ASCAP and BMI and CSAC, they pay songwriters and publishers. They don't pay the artist. Sound Exchange pays the artist, and we don't care who wrote the song. So if you did a whole album of Bob Dylan, in an ASCAP BMI world, Bob Dylan would be pretty happy because you're doing his songs. But in the Sound Exchange world, you would be happy because you're getting paid for doing Bob Dylan's songs.
So what Sound Exchange does essentially is make sure that everyone who participates in that recording ecosystem is paid.
Right.
So
whoever is the featured artist. We are concerned with whoever the featured artist is.
Right.
So Billy Joel would get paid by Sound Exchange. Billy Joel's drummer would not. Even though Billy Joel's drummer is on the track.
Is there a facility for paying sidemen, musicians?
There is. There's the AFM-AFTRA fund. It's
so that's the AFM is the musicians union, and AFTRA is a vocalists union. They've created a fund.
Yeah, they've created a fund, and if you take a royalty at 100% from Sound Exchange, 50% of that royalty goes to whoever owns the master, which would be the copyright owner or the label. 45% of that royalty goes to the featured artist, and then 5% is given over to that fund so that they can administer to session players, background singers, Billy Joel's drummer, etc.
Right. And keep in mind, if that seems somehow unfair, keep in mind that side musicians, sidemen, session musicians, are often paid for their work in session, but very often a royalty artist isn't. They're the ones who are gambling for the royalty in the future. So. So 5% goes to a fund, and sidemen can, sidemen is, as many of you probably know, it's a technical term for a studio musician or somebody who comes in on the session. They can apply to that fund to get payment on tracks that they worked on.
Right.
Now, your mission is to get money moving, right? You guys are sitting on a good deal of money,
yes.
and your mission is to get it out.
Out the door.
Right.
We are judged by how much money we get out. So it makes it look like I'm not doing my job if I'm not getting people paid. Now, the tricky part of that is if you're dealing with someone who doesn't believe that they're really owed $50,000, you can't put a gun to their head. I mean, you can't force them to sign the papers that they need to sign to tell us where to send the check. It took me 3 years to get the Pussycat Dolls registered. 3 years.
Wow.
And, their manager knew. But because of the way that they were set up, the Pussycat Dolls really are not a group. They're employees of Universal Music. So it's like the Monkees, or they've been formed by a label. And because Sound Exchange has to pay the artist and not a third party, we couldn't pay Pussycat Dolls, Inc. because Pussycat Dolls were owned by Universal. Therefore, we would be paying Universal twice. So when it comes to a situation like that, we had to get every girl to register separately and send them checks individually. Another thing I want to bring up before I forget the point is we also pay producers. So if you have agreed to go into a studio and produce someone's record, you can sign a letter of direction along with the artist, which would basically give the artist share, whatever the agreement is.
A piece of the share. So if you produce a record and you get 3 points on the record,
right.
you can sign a letter of direction. The artist can sign a letter of direction that assigns 3% of their Sound Exchange royalties to the producer,
Right.
and Sound Exchange will pay the producer.
Yes.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And we do it like Tom Lord Alge and the Alge brother, you know.
Yeah.
Lord, they
Yeah.
also get letter of directions because they're aware of this royalty stream, and they want a piece of it, you know. So we have to be mandated by the artist to remove some of their royalties and pay it out to someone else.
So it's very artist-centric.
It's very artist-centric. Everyone that works there is a musician in some capacity. Our executive director, John Simpson, managed Harry Belafonte and Mary Chapin Carpenter. He's a musician himself. I'm a musician. A lot of people that work there. There's jazz musicians. So we're very artist-friendly. We believe in the cause. We're not in it for the money. It's a nonprofit. You know, no one works at a nonprofit for money. So everyone there believes in the mission and believes in getting out there and helping artists get what's due to them.
How's it set up? I mean, there must be a tremendous number of challenges in reaching artists that are due money. And how's it set up? So you have people monitoring genres?
We do. We have consultants that we work with. Like we have a Latin consultant who speaks Spanish and then can talk to the Spanish artists from Puerto Rico or Miami that really don't speak a lot of English, or Mexico or Spain, and focus on that genre because there's a whole set of channels that are strictly Latin-based. We have some jazz experts that go and find old jazz musicians. But the challenge is, how do you find someone that died in a car crash in 1939 that never married and had no children, and their music is still getting played? It's difficult. So as each distribution goes on, and more radio logs are given to us, and more performances are generated, and more names start showing up with balances of over $100, it can be kind of a daunting task. And then, it's a lot of Google research. It's trying to find who the estate is, who are the heirs. I had to find Howlin' Wolf several years ago. He was one of our top unpaid artists. I didn't know how to find him or his heirs. So I Googled and saw that there was a recent book out on Amazon.com that had just been released. I went to that author's website, emailed the author, and said, in your research on Howlin' Wolf, did you interview or come across, any estate or heirs that I could talk to? And he sent me email addresses and 2 phone numbers for the 2 daughters that Howlin' Wolf had. I called one of the daughters up and I said, today's your lucky day. I've got X amount of money for you. And she started crying. She had never received a royalty for her dad ever in her life, ever. And Wanda Jackson, I don't know if anyone in here knows who Wanda Jackson is, but she was the female Elvis. Back in the 50s, she was rocking and rolling when women didn't rock and roll.
If you don't know who Wanda Jackson is, you should. She's badass.
She's badass. And she's still around. She's still rocking and rolling.
She's still badass, actually.
Yeah.
98-year-old badass.
Yeah. I got Wanda Jackson registered, and they received her check, and her husband, who's still her manager, called me and said, I got a check, and we don't know what this is from. And I said, well, this is your money. These royalties are for satellite radio airplay. And he said, do you know that Wanda has to play? I mean, she's in her 70s, and she's still playing rock and roll because that's how we have to pay our mortgage, So thank you. And the next week, I got a package in the mail, and I opened it up, and it was an 8x10 black and white photograph from 1959, and she had signed it, "Let's rock." Thank you so much, Wanda Jackson. It's on my desk, and it keeps me motivated. It makes me realize that we are touching people's lives. We are helping artists.
And yet, Sound Exchange has gotten a bad rap in some cases. People have accused Sound Exchange of holding on to the money, of being an arm of the RIAA. Pandora did an awful lot to damage your reputation when you were holding Pandora's feet to the fire. They were claiming that you were trying to put them out of business and that you were anti-tech and innovation and small business. Give us a little perspective on that.
Well, the Pandora issue was tricky because, nobody wants to be associated with the RIAA. But in its own defense, the RIAA was the one that started Sound Exchange. And I mean start, they said they recognized that in this new digital age, somebody needed to be protecting the artists. So they created...
Well, to be fair, they're also protecting their own
interests
because of the labels. They generated, to their their credit, they generated this artist royalty for the performance, but they also generated a royalty for themselves.
For themselves.
In the form of the copyright holder's royalty.
Right. But in 2003 is when we broke off altogether from them, and became a 501c nonprofit, separate from the RIAA. And we're governed by a board of directors. There's 9 label representatives, and then there's 9 artist representatives. Amy Mann used to be on our board. We currently have Martha Reeves on our board. And then you've got the majors, and then you've also got independent record labels that are represented there. Matador was on our board.
Is still on your board.
And they're still there. So, it's a fair and balanced, and don't get me wrong, they like to argue and they like to get, the issues hashed out because, like Billy said, labels are looking out for their own interests. Now, if you've got an artist, they feel that they can just recoup, and say, oh, well, they still owe us money, and so we'll just take theirs. And that's when the artists say, well, no, we went into the studio, we did the work, they're playing my music, therefore they are still entitled. So it's a robust conversation that happens, and a lot of the issues are still on the back burner that still haven't been resolved. A big issue that hasn't been resolved are Broadway recordings. If the Broadway channel plays, Do, Re, Mi, or whatever from Sound of Music, do we just pay Julie Andrews, or do we pay Julie Andrews and every kid that played the Von Trapp children?
Right. I'd say pay the Von Trapps.
Right.
It's important to pay the kids.
But if the radio log says, Julie Andrews and cast, do you pay the entire cast, or do you just pay the cast that appeared on that song?
Right. So there are a lot of wrinkles.
So there are still some issues. Symphonies, orchestras. You listen to a classical channel on XM. Do you pay every member of the orchestra? If so, how long will it take for them to generate $10? Because that's a huge amount of people. So there still are issues that are being worked out, but they're being worked out fairly and evenly, and there's a good give and take between the labels and the artists.
And just to close the loop on the Pandora thing, you guys ended up inventing a kind of license for Pandora, because the kind of royalties that they collect are technically
non-interactive streaming.
Non-interactive streaming. Now, as you all know, when you listen to Pandora, you basically pick the first song, and then you don't pick anymore. You can say you don't like a song to a point, and then and then you can't skip anymore. But Sound Exchange, you guys had to essentially come to terms with what Pandora was and create a new kind of license.
Right, and we called it a pure play license. So while all of the naysayers are saying, oh, you're trying to put Pandora out of business, and we would get death threats, people would call us and fuck you, and all this other stuff, and it's like, and we don't want to put anyone out of business. We believe in, people doing their thing. But if you're going to make money and get investors behind you and, be the hip new thing and get an iPhone app, why do you get to take advantage of all of that money that's being generated, but the content, the people who are giving you the content don't get a dime? We didn't feel that was fair. So a lot went back and forth with Pandora, and we finally came to an agreement. They agreed to change their business model a little bit, and now you start seeing a little bit of advertising on Pandora.
Right.
And that was so that they could compensate the people who basically generate their content. Right. So we're all good with Pandora. No more death threats, no more phone calls. And Pandora is actually really on board with Sound Exchange now.
Right. So the next group to issue death threats will be terrestrial radio, right?
Yes.
AM and FM. Because you guys have legislation before Congress now. H.R. 848 is a House resolution.
It's called the Performance Rights Act. We call it the PRA. Like I said earlier, when you hear Respect on regular radio, Otis Redding gets the royalty, but not Aretha Franklin. And Frank Sinatra actually started this bill years and years and years ago, but it kept getting pushed to the back burner because, as you know, Frank Sinatra toured up into his 80s doing Vegas shows and whatever else because he didn't write any of the songs that he did. He was just an interpreter of music. He was a vocal stylist. He did standards. And he thought through the years that this was grossly unfair. that he could sell a song and not make a dime from it. So he worked really, really hard up until his death to try to get this bill going. It's interesting to note that the U.S., Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and Rwanda are the only countries that don't pay a performance royalty.
Think about that. Yeah. And because we don't pay performance royalties, because the United States doesn't pay a performance royalty, you all don't get paid a performance royalty by the countries that do pay performance royalties. So you may get radio play in the Netherlands or the UK or Germany or France. These are very large commercial markets, and you guys may get radio play or some kind of broadcast play. And even though those territories issue performance royalties to the artist, you as Americans won't get paid. Your money goes into a fund that sits in a black box and then goes on to fund arts programs in Norway or retirement for musicians in the UK. And if House Resolution 848 were passed, it might mean that this situation can be rectified, and that with the United States issuing performance royalties to artists, other countries would then begin to free up some of the funds that are due our artists.
There's an old civil rights song that the Staples singers did called "When Will I Get Paid for the Work That I've Done?" And that has a lot of meaning in more ways than one, not only for the struggle of African Americans in the 60s, well, for before that, but if you can parlay that to musicians and artists now, if you frame it as a labor issue, it makes more sense, But we're up against the NAB, the National Association of Broadcasters, who make billions of dollars in advertising. Right. They pay their CEOs $10 million bonuses, and they don't give a dime to any of the artists that they play.
They're a powerful lobbying force, right? So they're against it right now, and some of the arguments against it are the same that you heard from Pandora, that it's going to drive them out of business. It's bad for smaller market stations, but these arguments are specious because this is a scalable royalty.
It's right? Very scalable. If you're a nonprofit organization or a college radio station, your rates are going to be different than AOL's or whoever, Clear Channel. We're not out to put the little guy out of business. And a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this is a tax. A tax goes to the government. This is a royalty going to the artist who made who performed the work, who went into a studio, gave it their all, and put their stamp on a song. I mean, Aretha Franklin is not a tax. Right. She's the queen of soul. You know what I mean? So if you can frame it as a labor issue, it makes a lot of sense. And then if you can frame it around the fact that we are the axis of evil around this issue, it makes even more sense that this is just a basic issue of fairness. It's what's right.
Right. So the way the argument is framed right now, this will affect all of you. If you are going to be in the music business and you are going to be working with content, you are going to be working with artists, this will affect all of you. And HR 848 is an important issue. And if you guys want to do anything about this, you can contact your representatives and let them know that you care. They need to hear from you. If they don't hear from you, they think it's not an issue. They need to hear some support for this resolution come upstream, or they're going to listen to the National Association of Broadcasters when they say it's bad business. This is good business for the arts, and it's good business for artists.
Yeah. It's fair business. I mean, it's
right.
like saying, I want to sell pencils, but why don't you give me the pencils? I'll sell them, and thanks for the pencils. It's
right.
not. It's not fair. So we've been bringing in a lot of artists to Capitol Hill in the past several months. We had Tony Bennett come in, and Nancy Sinatra spoke, Lyle Lovett, Sheryl Crow, will.i.am, Patti LaBelle. I can't tell you how many people have come down to the Hill to speak to their senators and their congressmen and say, this affects me. And then they'll say, oh, well, does Sheryl Crow really need another mansion? Well, it's not about the Sheryl Crows. It's about, the Supremes who, were left one of the members was basically left to die alone in the 70s, because she didn't get anything.
Right.
And I recently had to deal with the Supremes account, and Florence Ballard's daughter. Are you familiar with the Supremes or Florence Ballard? That's what Dreamgirls is loosely based on. She called me up and had never received a royalty for her mother's work. And her mother, Stop in the Name of Love. These are big hits, and never has received a royalty. So,
and the royalty is structured so that all the artists on the performance get paid, right?
It's all
song by song. Like if a band has shifting members,
right.
We talked earlier today about Fleetwood Mac as like a very complicated example. They were a blues band in the 60s with different members. Peter Green was in the band early on, and then he was not. Then Stevie Nicks joined in '73 with
Lindsey Buckingham.
Depending on what song you're paying on, you pay a different cast of characters, right?
Yeah. We try our best to do a royalty breakdown schedule per track. Now, when you have a catalog as large as Fleetwood Mac's, they have a 40-year career. It can get quite complicated, and you've got to do a lot of research and AllMusic Guide and whatever you can, and getting photocopies of the actual liner notes and the credits and all of that stuff to figure it out, because you want to do it right. The Supremes was a good example because it was, Diana Ross felt that she should be entitled to more than the other girls because she was Diana Ross, and then it was, when it originally started, it was just the Supremes. So, and everyone knows the Supremes were a 3-girl group, so each one would be entitled to 33% because they were each the featured artist. So we break it down as much as we can so that everyone on the track is getting paid. If you're a 4-member group, each one would get 25%. If you're a 5-member group, you would get 20%, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, and you must be pretty gratified in your work.
I have worked jobs that I could not stand. I would have to force myself in to sit in a little cubicle and stare at a computer screen all day. And this is the first job that I've ever had in my life where I look forward to going to work. I look forward to going out and trying to find someone and making their day and saying, hey, I've got X amount of dollars for you. I look forward to discussing the issue. I'm passionate about it. And when you can have a 9-to-5 that you're passionate about, there's nothing better than that. There really isn't.
Yeah, great. We'd like to open it up for questions. We'd really like as many of you to know as much about Sound Exchange as possible. If you affiliate with ASCAP and BMI, you should also affiliate with Sound Exchange. There's no fee associated with registering for Sound Exchange. As a matter of fact, our new legal EU is interested in helping people affiliate, and if they need ASCAP BMI affiliations or copyright registrations. And I think that they're talking about throwing in a Sound Exchange registration with anybody who hires them to do copyright and BMI work. So definitely speak to the legal EU kids, and keep in mind that Sound Exchange is here for you. It's definitely in your best interest to register. Go ahead.
Hi, I had 2 questions actually. Firstly, how exactly are you guys funded? Like obviously you don't generate profit, but you have revenue coming in from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, do you only administrate American performances, or if you handle internationally, how do you deal with like pure play streaming like through Spotify and stuff like that?
Those are great questions. Sound Exchange takes an admin rate off of the top from the licensees. We're currently operating under a 5% admin rate, which is extremely low for the industry.
And that's the same way BMI and ASCAP work,
Yeah.
right? So BMI and ASCAP do the same thing. They take an administrative cut off of the top of the funds. They take approximately 13%.
13%.
They take about 13%, and Sound Exchange takes 5%.
And that's coming off the top from the licensees, and then what's left over is paid out to the artists and the labels. And your second question, if you become a member of Sound Exchange, there's two ways you can get paid with Sound Exchange. You can either be a member of it, or you can just be a payee of it. If you're just a payee of it, you're just going to get your U.S. royalties. If you sign the member agreement, that allows us to work with reciprocal societies around the world, and we have reciprocal societies with PPL in the UK, with SENA in the Netherlands, with RAP in Ireland. There's several down in South America. There's several in Mexico. We're working on some in Africa, in France, in Germany. So we work with other societies who are our sister organizations just in other territories. And if they have money for a U.S. artist and that artist is a member of our society, they will release those funds to us. So it's a reciprocal
And
agreement.
do you pay European artists?
If they are a member of
If they're
PPL, yeah,
members.
we will send it over to them.
I see. So it's not a case of an American being a member of Sound Exchange and getting paid UK royalties, but you're a facility for a UK artist who's a member of PPL getting paid for
That's
their
correct.
American work.
That's correct. And on our agreement, you can list the territories that you want us to collect in. You can say, you know what, I love how my royalties are being allocated from Ireland. Please do not mess that up. Go ahead and let Ireland pay me directly, but go ahead and collect for me in the Netherlands and the UK because I'm having issues with that or whatever. So you can click and check the boxes that you want us to collect in.
So an American artist wouldn't join as a member then, in this case?
No, they would, because if PPL has money for that American
Well,
artist.
that's what I was
yeah.
asking. So an American artist due money from the UK could get it due to a reciprocal relationship.
Right, or that organization in the UK could try to find that American artist on their own, and then
Right.
they would be getting streams from different performing rights societies.
So this is a way of perhaps circumventing the fact that we don't collect an artist royalty,
Right.
an artist performance royalty.
Right.
That's again, that makes it that much more compelling, I would imagine, for an American artist.
Like we don't have the authorization for Beyonce, and there's a society down in Brazil that has a lot of money for her, but because we don't have her as a member, that they can't release that money, and they have the same issues that we do. How do you find this artist? It's easier for people to just to deal with us because we can just administer that royalty for them. But because we don't have that authorization, Beyonce's money is still sitting in Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
So we're trying to get word to Beyonce's father, Matthew Knowles, who runs her company. Be like, look, we need you to sign this document so that we can get these funds released. So, it's a time issue. It's and Beyonce's a busy person. So, but yeah, other societies are out there looking to get those royalties out the door as well.
So let me just points of clarification here. HR 848, this bill, before Congress, if it's passed, Americans would get a performance royalty on terrestrial broadcast. So when you're talking about the state of the music industry now and sources of revenue, potential sources of revenue, that's a significant one for artists to enjoy. If 848 were passed, it would make a big difference in your futures. So in terms of appealing to your self-interest, there it is. The other, I lost the plot. I saw Charles getting up to ask a question, and I forgot what I was going to say. Charles, go ahead, ask your question.
Sorry.
No.
Two questions. When you became a 501c3, was it mandated that your board of directors have members of the people that, I guess, originated the idea of those receiving revenues for performance? And my second question is, what if you have a dual citizenship? Do the countries that already pay for performance royalties pay the people that have dual citizenships, or do they not, because we are Americans as well?
The board of directors was organized well before my time coming there, so I'm not sure how they came about deciding who would make up that board of directors. I know that to be fair, they wanted representatives from all, and it's not just artists, it's also artist representatives. Right. Managers are on the board.
There's representatives of all interested parties.
Right, of all interested parties. But how they determined to create it in that way, I'm not quite sure, because it was before I started there. But if you have dual citizenship, to answer your second question, it doesn't matter where you're a citizen of. If you're a citizen of Portugal and your music is getting played on the Portuguese channel in the U.S., that's your money regardless of where your citizenship is based. So these are U.S. streamed royalties. And we send checks all around the world. I mean, there's people who are getting checks. You would be surprised where they live.
I think the point Charles was making was, since as Americans we don't get those royalties on terrestrial radio, if you held American citizenship and British citizenship, would you be in line for British performance royalties? But I think it's where your entity would be based. Seems there's negative reciprocation. Yeah. Well, again, your entity probably wouldn't have dual citizenship. The entity, the artist, named, the band name, you know. Right,
Right.
right, right. That's an interesting question, but I'm not sure there's a clear answer for that.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Anybody else for Sound Exchange? Yes.
For the case-by-case basis, for the kind of unsure cases, I guess we were talking about earlier, do you ever consider the artist? Do you ever invite them to the board to get their opinion on who should be paid, or do you ever consider the contract that they have already signed as a group, or is it just the board who decides everything as far as who gets paid?
Oh, I think that what he's talking about is what you're referring to is where a band like Fleetwood Mac had many different performers on different songs,
right?
In that case, there's a record of who actually played on those songs, and I believe that's what Sound Exchange research is. In that case, you come to a finding of fact, right?
Right.
So
but the board of directors is basically determining. They're basically determining who the featured artist is, and in the case of a Broadway soundtrack,
right, and the symphonies and stuff
or
like
symphonies,
right.
The featured artist lines get a little blurred, which is why those issues are still being discussed. I think what we've started to pay symphonies as a company or the the conductor of the symphony, and let them administer it out to their staff or to their employees.
That's my question.
Right.
Are those constituencies alerted to the fact that there's money that's been paid into the organization?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Thanks.
Sorry, go ahead.
Where are the royalties being generated from, in the first place? And this might be kind of a dumb question, but why can't I kind of understand why the artist can't be paid directly, but if it's a new artist, why don't the royalties just go straight to I'm not sure I'm clear where the royalties come from.
Your royalties are coming from satellite radio airplay. So
right.
If I pay $30 a month to XM and Sirius to listen to 100 different channels 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, I'm paying a subscription. And the royalties are generated from these subscription services. So every time that music is played on those subscription services, that licensee or the subscription provider has to pay for that content.
They need to kick out a fraction of a cent per play per song, right? So they do that out of their earnings. They have a business model. They earn money on that business model, and they keep a record of every song they play. They pay a fraction of a cent out for every one of those songs that they play. And the reason, if I can speak on your behalf,
no, go ahead.
We covered this a bit earlier, so I have the answer in the front of my brain. But the reason that artists aren't paid directly is because the administrative burden of that task would be so great. There's so much data, so many payees, that for Sirius XM to contact every band on the unsigned bands channel and pay them, it's virtually impossible.
Okay.
The burden of data and the burden of the task would be so great. So Sound Exchange acts as a point of contact, a responsible party that encourages artists with masters, with songs, to affiliate with them, and they then take the payment from the they play the middleman in that case to great effect. They take the money from Sirius XM and distribute it to their affiliates.
Right. So the problem is kind of that the idea of giving artists their royalties with satellite radio kind of came at separate times. Is that what it is?
No, I think
why didn't satellite radio take the burden of that right off the as soon as satellite radio existed?
Why didn't they just start paying
Right.
artists directly?
Right.
Because it's not really that's not really in their business model. I mean, they end up the way that radio has always been set up, and the way that satellite radio was set up as a next generation radio, was that they pay a society for the right to use all this music. Like the BMI and ASCAP are there to take songwriter and publishing royalty, a performance royalty for songwriting and publishing, right? And Sirius XM has that same obligation, but they also now have another entity that they just needed another entity. They just needed someone to collect the new kind of royalty, and Sound Exchange became that someone.
All right, cool.
We've processed, we have a whole data research team, and they give us their radio logs. Now, the problem with these radio logs is they're not always accurate. So if you say, oh, well, I played Like a Virgin by Madonna, and they failed to put the album that came from, or it was a live cut from, a compilation, it doesn't always match up. So we have a team of data researchers that say, you know what, this is Madonna, Like a Virgin. This should go to, Warner Brothers or Maverick or whatever it was that she was on, because it's missing the label, or it's, missing the album name. And here's another instance where there is an album name, so we have to match that performance up. Or our number 2 highest unpaid label is called Not Available.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as not available records. It's just missing data. So we have a whole team of people who have to sit there and find who the rights owner is, what the actual album title was supposed to be,
Right.
And clean that data up.
Something else that came out in an earlier conversation that I think would be interesting for you guys to know is that Sound Exchange is only obligated to hold on to these funds for 3 years, and then they can reallocate them. They can absorb them into their funds and redistribute them so that everybody who's signed up for Sound Exchange would get a little bump in their check. But instead of doing that, because they're still new, Sound Exchange has elected to keep those funds extant, to keep them in a pool, and to continue to search for these people. And now, 8 years later, you still haven't reabsorbed any of those funds.
We have not, no.
Right. So, and there are no plans to do so at this point?
Not at this time. We don't feel that it's fair. ASCAP's been around for 80 years. We've been around for 8. It's not really fair to penalize someone for not knowing who we are.
So it's still about getting the word out.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I have 2 questions. One's on the continuation of the featured artist question, and other one's on registration. For the featured artist, if you have like a group, say like Bob Marley and the Wailers, who would you consider the featured artist? Both Bob Marley and the Wailers, or does Bob Marley get weighed more than the Wailers? And
That's
Bob Dylan in the band, and so on and so forth.
Well, when a lot of these people, like Bob Marley, they have corporations set up. And the corporation is getting paid, and then the corporation will allocate.
So that's not a matter decided by Sound Exchange?
Yeah, we don't want to get involved in whatever business structure. Now, it depends. If one of the Wailers comes forward and says, I want to be paid separately outside of the corporation, we can do that. We can say, okay, Bob Marley Inc. or whatever his company will get, 80%, and then, that other bass player or whoever, that other Wailer will get his share.
So that other individual would demonstrate a claim. They'd make a claim.
Yeah, they would make a claim. It happens a lot with these 80s hair metal bands that, quit or, and I hear it all the time. Oh, I don't talk to him anymore. We quit speaking in 1987 when he, broke a whiskey bottle over my head, and I never want to see him again.
Stole my hairspray.
Yeah, stole my hairspray. And some of these people, they don't speak. They haven't spoken in years. And you're trying, and one of them will register, and you say, well, can you give me the contact information for the other 3 or whatever? And they're like, no, they can fend for themselves, or or do whatever. Or if there's a company set up and then one of the band members quits, we can reallocate, readjust the payee schedule and make it fair, so that if someone wants to step outside of that corporation or that partnership, they can move forward.
And you had one other question.
What about the newer artists what about the newer artists like that aren't part of like the corporation? You would say like say Conor Oberst and the Mystic Valley Band. Would Conor Oberst be paid more royalties than the Mystic Valley Band would be?
It depends. If the Mystic Valley Band came forward and wanted their own share, we would accommodate that. But in terms of Conor Oberst, again, some things are a little gray area, because it's like, well, I am Bright Eyes, well, I am the Supremes, or whatever it may be. But we have to look at the performances and look at the tracks. So if the band members came forward and said, you know what, he'll say he's Bright Eyes, but I played on all these albums, and Bright Eyes is considered a group. Conor Oberst may think he is Bright Eyes, but in reality, a group of people made up Bright Eyes.
I meant like the dual name bands,
Right.
like Conor Oberst and
Right.
Mystic
No,
Valley.
they're still entitled to a percentage of their own royalty. Yeah.
All right, and my second question was on registration.
Hey, that was your second question.
No. That was a sorry.
Go ahead. You mean your third question?
Yes, my third question is on registration. When you register, do you just do like an artist register and then you you guys keep track of what songs are coming out, or you have to register for like each song
Good
that
question.
you release?
No, so long as the name of the band does not change, it will match up in our system as matching to that payee. So, but if someone like Prince decides to change his name to a symbol, we would probably need to create a new account so that the symbol would be notated, unless, I mean, if you didn't follow it, his name changes. But so long as your name stays the same, we're going to match on your name.
So I could register and then come out with new songs later, and you guys will still keep track of those new
Yeah,
songs?
because your name isn't changing, just your song titles.
Right.
All right.
Okay, I think that's about it. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. That was good.